Greetings. My name is Benjamin Hagwood, the director here at the Vancouver Debate Academy. Today we're going to take a look at The Great Debaters, a film that documents the amazing accomplishments of the 1935 Wiley College debate team. Speech and debate has always served as a fundamental way to help students achieve their dreams and access different levels of life. Education was not always readily available for African Americans in the United States, and as a matter of fact, it was generally frowned upon for them to be able to do things like read and write until the Emancipation Proclamation. This particular story really touches home for me because it shows how speech, debate, and public speaking offer opportunities for us to not only share our perspective, but to be able to show that we deserve the opportunity to stand alongside anyone and compete. This particular story is great because it shows that these students who were generally seen as not as competitive, not as smart, not as important as other students, were able to not only compete, but win. And everything's not about winning, but it's important to understand the cultural context of being able to not only find your voice, but to be able to persuade others that the perspective you have, the opinions you share, and the positions you hold are ones that society should start to move towards. So as we start to look at this video, I want to take the time to recognize the importance of investing in students and investing in reflective representation that shows them that your voice is one that deserves to be heard and to be amplified. Let's get to the video.
Means that you are what?
A gangster.
Brilliant, Mr. Burgess.
Samantha Book.
Book.
Book with an E.
Arise, Miss Book, with an E. Into the hot
It's
spot.
very interesting. 1935.
With
The
an E.
mixture of both
You
men
know,
and women
there's never been a
participating in
female
events.
on the debating team, ever.
He even acknowledged it.
Yes, because, sir, I am just as qualified
stammering, Miss
as
Book.
anybody else here. My gender
Resolve.
has nothing.
Welfare discourages hard work.
Good job, Miss Book. Your gender
You'll
does
argue
not
the negative.
disqualify. Amen.
Most of the New Deal goes to children anyway, and to the handicapped, and to old people.
Is that fact or conjecture?
It is a fact.
Speak up.
It is a fact.
What's your source?
The president.
Of the United States?
Yes, sir.
That's your primary source. You spoke to President Roosevelt personally.
Of course not. I did not speak to him personally, but I listened to his
Fireside
fireside
chat.
chat.
Ah, a radio broadcast.
Yes.
Any other source?
Radio as evidence
Yes,
is
there are
awesome.
other sources.
We don't even use
Like that look in a
anymore.
mother's eyes when she can't feed her kids. Without welfare, Mr. Tolson, people would be starving.
Mr. Burgess here. He's unemployed. Obviously, he's not starving. Your logic fell apart. Major premise, the unemployed are starving. Minor premise,
Good lesson
Mr.
here,
Burgess
teaching
is
what a
unemployed.
syllogism is.
Conclusion, Mr. Burgess is starving.
We
Your
use
major
that to
premise
build
was based on a
arguments.
faulty
Our
assumption.
Denzel, I see you.
Classic fallacy.
In this opening scene, there are a lot of very fascinating dynamics that take place. The first one is tryouts do happen. That is an accurate part of how we generally choose debate teams, especially at the collegiate level. Everyone wants to participate, and we want everyone to participate. But there has to be a process for us to figure out who's ready and who's not. Miss Book with an E is introduced as a character that would not generally be allowed in these spaces. You have to remember in 1935, the same way that schools were segregated, women were generally not seen as capable of participating in these type of events or even going to university. And although we live in a much different time now where we understand that gender, as Miss Book with an E said, does not determine her intellectual ability, we also recognize that Professor Tolson doesn't actually hold that against her. He pushes her. He comes up and says, speak with confidence. Tell me the thing you're saying. What do you believe? And the first introduction of that is the idea of logical argumentation, or as Professor Tolson put, a syllogism. Major premise, minus premise, and a conclusion is the way we begin teaching students how to make arguments in a way that's acceptable and harder to beat. If you can make a logical argument, it's much more difficult to dismiss your position. Something else interesting happened here. When Miss Book with an E was challenged on her production of evidence, which is the example that allows her argument to be right, which happened to be a radio broadcast of the President of the United States at the time, Professor Tolson pushed back. And he said, well, if you did not talk to the president yourself, how do we know that is a viable piece of evidence? Well, radio shows, newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and now the internet have made evidence much more available to us. All of these things are evidence we use to continue to build arguments. And the scene does a great job of depicting not only does logic matter, but having evidence that supports it matter. The most interesting part of this scene is the very last part, the appeal to emotion that's given by Miss Book with an E. And that's because from an Aristotelian persuasive perspective, there are three parts of really argumentation that we have to think about: the logos, ethos, and pathos. And she's doing a great job of demonstrating how, although she may not have spoken to the president, she knows the look on a mother's face when they cannot feed their children because they are unemployed, because they don't have money, and how devastating that could actually be. This is a great scene. It gives us a chance to really connect with how students begin by learning logical argumentation, but how there are alternative forms of persuasion that we can use to really connect with our audience.
I just want to thank you.
For what?
Well, for your performance tonight. I mean, how many other students ever stand up to Tolson?
I did.
No,
That's
you
true.
answered the question and I spouted.
Most students don't stand up to their debate
This book,
coaches.
me. Why isn't a fireside chat a legitimate source? Because Tolson said so. Nobody has better access to those statistics than the president.
That's a great point. The president will generally have better statistics than everyone else. And if she would have pushed that point, Professor Tolson maybe would have backed down. As soon as the tryout ends and we see interaction between both the students, I believe one of the characters' name is James, and then we have Miss Book with an E, and we have a third character. We see that community begins to form actually on debate teams. Students cultivate development in their peers. Coaches exist to primarily push students in the right direction, but here we see the star debater as kind of positioned in camera shots, and just from what we know about the story, encourage Miss Book with an E to push back even more. Because sometimes the arguments we make are valid arguments, and the issue is not that we haven't explained it well, but simply we're unwilling to continue defending it or push someone to tell us why it's wrong. That development is part of the magic of speech and debate that happens when students work with each other and build community.
1 week.
That's right.
I thought Prairie View was first.
Prairie View
Prairie
was tough,
View.
so I thought we needed a warm-up.
With the best Negro college in the state?
Best Negro college in
That's
the
right,
state.
Mr. Burgess.
Wow.
Does that frighten you?
Yes,
I
sir.
would be afraid too if I didn't go to that college.
1 week's not enough time to write our arguments.
You do the research, I'll write the argument.
Interesting. He wants them to do all the
Wait, you-
research, and he's going to write the arguments.
You write the arguments.
And you
And
deliver the
clearly they have a
research.
What the hell
problem
do I
with
look
that.
like, a mailman?
Hell is where you're headed if you question me again. It's a matter of
Ooh.
experience.
Well, how do I know you writing better than I?
write the arguments. That's the way it's been. That's the way it's
Yeah.
going to be. Any more questions?
In this scene, we see the announcement of not one, but 2 debate competitions. And the coach feels that Prairie View is very tough, so he wants them to go up against another competitor first. And this is the first point of clash we see between Professor Tolson and the students. First is fear. The idea that they are not good enough to be the best Negro college team in a debate. And this is the way a lot of students feel. This is still something that we deal with as coaches on a daily basis, and it's completely true that sometimes our self-confidence is hindered because when we hear a name of a big school, it gets scary. We're taking students to Harvard in February, actually, and when we tell people that, everyone's always, oh, Harvard, right? It's impressive. It's a great university. But going to a school does not determine the level of competence that you have. And it's an important scene, actually, where Professor Tolson says this is not a question of competence when it comes to who prepares the arguments. It's a question of experience. It's about being able to identify the arguments we know people will make and positioning ourselves to be more strategic than them. This scene does a great job of showing how at times debaters can become confident and believe that they by themselves are able to accomplish tasks, and they may be in some instances. But it's important that we go through the process of understanding both research and the way we prepare arguments are 2 parts of how we maintain success. This scene does a great job of saying that if students do research and coaches work alongside with them to help prepare the strategy of arguments, we find better success when we work together as a team. And this also shows the slow evolution of how coaches may have to start with helping you with an argument, but hopefully by the time that you do it and you have more experience, you can do it on your own. It's all part of the process. And it's important that we trust that process. Okay, we got the debate going. They're in a church. We debating from the pulpit.
Resolved. Unemployment relief should be ended when the depression
Professionally dressed.
ends.
Yes, the depression ends.
I traveled back through history to 1536, when the first poor laws of England were mandated. In those days, the dole, or welfare as we call it, was funded by voluntary
Strong
contributions.
opening statement.
But as time
Good framing.
passed, the English devised the allowance system, the first unemployment relief. Only now it was paid with involuntary contributions, more commonly known as
A
taxes.
good joke here to open is always good. It's a great
The
opening.
allowance system was a disaster. The only real unemployment relief is to give a man a job. But to do that, you have to give the economy life, not tax it.
A great
to
opening
death.
statement. Taxes do not help the economy. Strong start from the first team.
When capitalism was young, the old puritanical concept of duty was, he who does not work shall not eat. Now that made sense when it was more work than men
Interesting.
willing to do it.
He included a
days
statement
ago.
that we often
People
see
today, we need a
from
new concept.
the Bible itself.
The right
Connection to
of the individual
spirituality,
to demand
religion
from
is
society
important.
just as much as he
Gives
gives
a
to
moral
society.
grounding to opening his argument.
Once, a Roman general brought peace to a rebellious province by killing all its citizens. Even his fellow Romans were shocked. One of them wrote, Solitudinem faciant pacem appellant, which means they create desolation and call it peace.
Latin. Okay.
Now, for all their facts and figures, the Paul Quinn debaters would also create desolation and call it peace. They would allow the unemployed to die so the economy can live.
A great move there. He attacked their use of facts as a reason to believe them and actually turned it against them.
Brilliant young woman I know was asked once to support her argument in favor of social welfare. She named the most powerful source imaginable. The look in a mother's face when she cannot feed her children. Can you look that hungry child in the eyes? See the blood on his feet from walking barefoot in the cotton fields? Or do you ask his baby sister with her belly swollen from hunger if she cares about her daddy's work ethic?
Standing ovation. Great emotional appeal at the end. The imagery of a child walking barefoot to the point where their feet are bleeding and a swollen belly from hunger. Really, really powerful, persuasive speech. In this final scene, there are so many things that stand out to me as being absolutely dynamic and interesting. The first one is the setting. In 1935, the participation of public debates in public spaces were not readily accessible to African Americans. So we see them debating in the church. And for most of the black community, the church stood as a pillar of political collaboration. It was the one place they could go and feel safe, have conversations, plan, and provide support for one another. The pulpit and its symbolism, its significance to the black church is generally the soapbox, the place where we have our most dynamic speakers. In the United States, we often reference people like Dr. Martin Luther King, where his speeches are played over and over again, but he practiced those things from the pulpit. So to start the scene of a debate over whether or not unemployment is something that should be a government concern or not is extremely powerful. It creates the imagery that we go to the black church, we go to a place of moral high standing, a place of solitude, to have these important conversations, and we participate. Now, outside of the setting itself, the arguments that take place are also great. We see the first team really focus on the facts of taxation doesn't really help the economy, and without taxation, you can't really solve unemployment. And that's really what they focus on. This style of argument kind of removes the humanness of speech and debate. It takes from us the position to evaluate people where they are and to see them as valuable outside of their economic benefit or what they produce for us as a society. That's important, remembering the cultural kind of legacies of black people in America. The most important part of this scene, though, is the final speaker. Speech and debate is not all about the competition. It's not. The competition is where we get the opportunity to show how we've grown and we've matured in the way that we think, but also the way that we deliver messages. And the final speaker does that. The final speaker uses both logic, uses the opponent's evidence against them, but finally matures and uses emotional appeal as a persuasive strategy to win the round. Ultimately, maturation is the thing we're looking for as coaches. We want students that can think for themselves. We want students that can express their own voice. And most importantly, we want students that are willing to defend the things that they say. This video is amazing. Professor Tolson is a pillar of the speech and debate community, and he provided countless opportunities for students to be able to find their voice and to be able to share it. As we review this video, the biggest things that stand out to me is the foundation of evidence, emotion, and audience adaptation. Those three fundamental skills that you develop in speech and debate as becoming the foundation for persuasion. The Great Debaters doesn't need a grade from me as a debate coach. It's a great film about a great story and great individuals. But we still give it an A+. It accurately portrays the way that we coach, the way that students mature over time, and how to give a fundamentally strong speech. I recommend everyone watch this film if you have not seen it. And for any students, try to find ways to respond to some of the arguments they're saying for fun. Until next time, be well.